I still remember the way the string quartet kept playing. They didn't stop, not when the whispers started, not when the wedding planner began pacing backstage, not even when my maid of honor grabbed my hand with a look that begged, "Don't panic yet." But I already knew, the moment the officiant cleared his throat and asked if anyone had seen the groom, I knew. Brandon wasn't coming. He wasn't running late. He wasn't stuck in traffic. He wasn't nervously fumbling with his bow tie in a dressing room somewhere. He was just gone. And I was standing there in a custom gown that cost more than my first car, under a flower arch on day I didn't even like, surrounded by 300 guests and 1,000 silent judgments. Someone coughed. Someone else took a photo. My father muttered, "We should give him a few more minutes," but even his voice cracked halfway through the sentence. I wasn't crying, not yet. I was frozen, like my entire nervous system had shut down just to protect me from the humiliation. I looked out at the crowd and saw my mother's tight smile, fighting to hold the family name together. My bridesmaids all pretending to scroll their phones so they wouldn't have to meet my eyes. The caterers peeking from the hallway waiting for someone to yell, "Cut the cake." But no one did, because there wasn't going to be a cake, or a kiss, or a husband. There was only me, 28, accomplished on paper, deeply in love with a man who had decided without warning that I wasn't worth showing up for. I should have seen the signs. Maybe I did. Maybe I was just too scared to admit what they meant. The way he joked about cold feet more than once. The way he said, "You planned everything so perfectly. I barely need to be there." The way he stopped saying "we" and started saying "you." I wanted so badly to be chosen, to be loved enough for someone to stand beside me and say "I do." Instead, I became a headline. Tech mogul leaves bride at the altar. That was the version the internet told. The version that went viral. The version that stuck to my name like gum on the bottom of a shoe. But that day, that hour, that exact moment when I realized the man I trusted most had vanished without a word, it didn't feel like a headline. It felt like drowning in front of an audience, like performing open heart surgery on yourself, while everyone watched but no one helped, like having every organ in your body collapse, while someone handed you champagne and said, "At least the weather's nice." I walked out before they could cancel the ceremony, before anyone could say, "We're so sorry," before the pity could settle in their eyes. I didn't take the flowers, didn't take the veil, didn't even take my purse. I grabbed the car keys from my cousin's hand and drove off in the maid of honor's Honda, still in the dress, still in shock, still bleeding on the inside, but too numb to scream. And I didn't stop driving until the city skyline disappeared behind me. The city I landed in wasn't special. It wasn't glamorous or exciting. It didn't have beaches or mountains or some symbolic name that whispered new beginning, and that was exactly why I chose it. No memories, no mutual friends, no risk of running into someone who'd ask me, "So what happened on your wedding day?" I rented the smallest studio I could find. 4 walls. A ceiling that leaked when it rained. A mattress on the floor, a chipped desk from a thrift store, and 1 suitcase of clothes that didn't fit the life I used to have. There was no closet for my wedding dress, so I left it behind. Let the hotel deal with it, or burn it. The elevator in my building broke every other week. The window didn't lock, and some nights I slept with the lights on because the shadows looked too much like regret. But it was mine. Mine to fall apart in, mine to disappear in, mine to be no one in. During the day, I worked temp jobs receptionist, filing clerk, coffee runner. Anything that paid just enough to cover rent and a single grocery bag. I didn't need much, just enough to survive, just enough to not go home. At night, I applied for better work, entry-level roles at companies I used to laugh at. Marketing firms, retail, even assistant positions in offices where I used to pitch brand strategy as a consultant, but no one called back. Because when they Googled me, they didn't see my resume. They saw the article, they saw her, the humiliated bride, the headline, the meme. One recruiter even said to my face, "We're just concerned about the drama that follows you." I almost laughed, like I was some walking PR nightmare for being publicly abandoned. So I stopped applying, stopped trying to reclaim a life that clearly didn't want me anymore. I started hiding instead, deleted social media, changed my last name on every document, cut my hair short, like that would fix something deeper. For a while, I convinced myself I was okay with anonymity, that disappearing was freedom. But the truth, I was grieving. Not just Brandon, not just the wedding. I was grieving me, the woman I used to be. The one who believed in fairy tales and partnerships and lifelong promises. The one who planned a future with someone who couldn't even text goodbye. And yet, somewhere between the grief and the numbness, I found something strange. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Silence. Not the silence of being ignored. Not the silence of being ghosted. But the kind that gave me space to breathe without pretending. The kind that let me fall apart without an audience. And in that silence, I began to write. Nothing poetic, nothing publishable, just lists, numbers, business ideas I used to scribble in notebook margins. Back when I thought I'd be someone's wife and someone's CEO, I had no funding, no clients, no contacts, but I still had my brain. And I refused to let Brandon take that from me, too. And then one day, between filing invoices and answering phones at yet another forgettable office, I met him. Danielle. He was polite, casual, kind in a way that didn't feel like pity. He asked for extra paper clips, and I made some sarcastic joke about corporate warfare. He laughed, but more than that, he looked at me like he actually saw me. Not the runaway bride, not the viral headline, just a woman, working, trying, breathing. He didn't know it then, but that was the first moment I started coming back to life. Daniel didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. He never brought up my past, never pried. He didn't even know my real last name for the first 3 months we talked. To him, I was just Emily the temp assistant, who double-checked every form and refilled the supply cabinet without being asked. And somehow that was enough. We started talking more during lunch breaks. Nothing serious at first, just small talk, inside jokes, and ridiculous debates about whether cereal counted as soup. But one afternoon, after a brutal phone call with a client who screamed at me for something I didn't even do, I cracked a little. I didn't cry. I didn't rant. I just let out a long, low sigh, like something inside me had quietly snapped. He looked up from his salad and said, "You're not meant to be here forever, are you?" I didn't answer, but my silence must have said everything. So he pulled out a napkin, drew a triangle, scribbled a few numbers, and said, "If you ever want to build something of your own, start with this." It was basic business strategy concepts I already knew before everything fell apart. But coming from him in that moment, it felt brand new, like someone handing me a match when I thought all my fire was gone. That night, I didn't scroll job boards. I made a plan. I listed every skill I still had: copywriting, analytics, client management, operations. I outlined the services I could offer behind the scenes, setting up HR systems, writing pitch decks, cleaning up messy budgets for founders who didn't have time to care. I didn't have a brand. I didn't have a company. But I had a name in my head, one that wasn't tied to shame or failure. Backline ops. Because I wasn't front-facing anymore. I wasn't the one on stage giving the speech or pitching the vision. I was the one in the background making sure nothing fell apart. Within 2 months, I landed my first client, a scrappy wellness startup, run by 2 exhausted siblings who didn't even know what onboarding meant. I charged them almost nothing, just enough to cover rent and groceries. But I rebuilt their entire back-end hiring pipeline payroll system org chart. When I finished, they referred me to 3 more startups. Word spread, quietly, steadily. No one knew who I was. No one asked about my wedding. They just knew I got things done. Daniel noticed. Of course he did. He started sending me small projects, spreadsheet cleanups, workflow audits. Then came the real offers. Client needs an interim COO, just until they closed Series A. You up for it? It scared me. I hadn't held a title since Brandon. I hadn't walked into a meeting as someone in so long. But I said yes, because here's the thing about disappearing. Eventually, you realize you don't owe anyone the same version of yourself. You can become someone new. By the end of that year, I wasn't a temp anymore. I was running a 6-person team. I had contracts with 4 startups and retainer deals with 2 VCs. Daniel was still in the picture, but never in a way that felt heavy or demanding. He'd show up with coffee, ask sharp questions, push me gently when I started playing too small. And not once did he ever bring up Brandon. Not even when one night I told him everything: the wedding, the headlines, the silence that followed. He didn't flinch. He just said people remember headlines for a moment, but they remember results forever. I didn't know it then. But the man who once handed me a napkin and a triangle, he'd one day hand me a ring. But before that, Brandon came back, not into my life, not into my heart, but into my inbox, and this time I was the one holding the pen. The subject line read, Series A Introduction, Brandon Cole, CEO, Verdant AI. I froze, not because I missed him, not because I still cared, but because the name felt like a ghost reaching through my screen, trying to pretend he hadn't disappeared. Verdant AI. It sounded exactly like the kind of company Brandon would start. Glossy website, trendy buzzwords, a mission statement that said everything and nothing. I clicked the deck anyway, out of curiosity, out of habit, maybe even out of petty. It was a mess. No real revenue, no product market fit. Just branding hype and a pitch built on vibes. And yet there he was, smiling in the founder bio, like he hadn't left someone at the altar and burned a future to the ground. The email wasn't from him. It was from Daniel's team. He was one of the founders in line for Daniel's next investment round. I stared at the screen for a long time, my coffee going cold beside me. Did he know, did Brandon know I was the one vetting his paperwork? The one managing Daniel's back-end portfolio? The one sitting with the authority to recommend or kill his chance at a $3 million injection? Probably not. That's the thing about men like Brandon. They forget the people they step on. They assume we disappear permanently. And I did for a while, but now I was the woman who signed checks, the woman who held veto power. And I wasn't interested in revenge. I was interested in remembering who the hell I had become. Later that afternoon, I brought the deck to Daniel's office. You know who this guy is? I asked. He glanced at the name, then raised an eyebrow. That's your Brandon. I nodded once. Daniel leaned back in his chair and waited. He didn't tell me what to do. He didn't offer comfort. He just gave me space. And then with the calmest voice, he said, You don't have to prove anything. But if you want the final say, the table's yours. It hit me all at once how full circle this was. Brandon left me alone in front of 300 people, stripped of dignity and explanation. Now he was walking into my house, not knowing I owned the floor. I didn't respond to the email, not right away. I asked Daniel to set up a formal review meeting, instead one of those pitch sessions where founders try to charm the room. A week later, Brandon walked into our building. Same swagger, same blazer, like nothing had ever happened. Like the past had expired. He didn't recognize me at first. My hair was shorter, my body language sharper. I didn't stand like someone waiting for permission anymore. He smiled across the table and said, Hi, I'm Brandon. Thanks for having me. I smiled back. Of course, we're looking forward to the presentation. He blinked. I saw it the moment it clicked. The brief flash of panic in his eyes. The ghost realizing the grave he'd dug for someone else was now under his own feet. But I didn't flinch. I took notes, asked questions, reviewed his projections with surgical precision. No anger, no outburst, just business. And when the meeting ended, he lingered. I didn't know you were here, he said, voice lower now. You look different. I closed my folder. I am. He hesitated, like he wanted to apologize. Maybe he thought he could undo it all with one sentence. But I didn't give him the chance, because I wasn't here for closure. I wasn't here for anything from him. I was here because this time he needed something from me, and I wasn't sure yet if I would give it. Brandon sent a follow-up email that night. Short, awkward, too careful. It was good to see you. I didn't know you were involved with this firm. I'd like the chance to talk off the record. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. He had already said everything the day he didn't show up. But now he was here. In a suit? polished, desperate, pitching dreams to the very people who took their cues from me. The next morning, Daniel walked into my office with a mug of black coffee and a raised eyebrow. "So, what do we think of Brandon's deck?" I didn't look up. Overinflated, vague metrics, no real structure behind the vision. Daniel nodded. And he's not getting our money. He smiled. Thought so. But I wasn't done. I pulled out a file I'd spent half the night building alternatives red flags, overlapping tech from better founders who weren't toxic landmines in a tailored jacket. Daniel flipped through the pages and whistled low. "You really did your homework. I had years of incentive," I replied, and that was true. Not because I wanted to destroy Brandon, but because I needed to never again feel powerless in a room where he stood. We invited him back for one more round of questions, standard procedure, except this time I wasn't just part of the back end, I was on the panel. Brandon walked in and saw my name on the placard. His jaw clenched. He tried to mask it, laugh, shrug, pretend it was fine. But I could see the storm behind his eyes. He was unraveling. He gave his pitch again, sweaty, rushed, skipping slides. When I asked a technical question, he stumbled. When I referenced a competing startup, he bluffed. And when I politely corrected him, he went quiet. That silence, it was everything. It was the reverse of my wedding day. Me calm, him breaking, me asking the questions, him trying not to choke. Afterward, he pulled me aside in the hallway. "I know I hurt you," he began. I was scared. I didn't know how to say it. I panicked. "Brandon," I said, voice even. "You left me standing in front of everyone I loved, wearing a dress I chose for you while the music played like a funeral." He looked down. "I wasn't ready. And you didn't think I deserved to know that before the altar." He didn't answer. I stepped closer, not to intimidate, but to make sure he understood. "This isn't about revenge," I said. "It's about consequence. You walked away from something real. Now you're here asking for money you haven't earned. I built something." "No," I cut in. "You built an illusion. And now you're trying to sell it to people who actually work for what they have." He stood there speechless. And I realized he wasn't a villain. He was just small. Smaller than the woman he left behind. Smaller than the empire she built after he ran. Later that day, I sent my final recommendation to Daniel's team: decline. Non-investable, lack of foundation, reputational risk. I didn't gloat, didn't toast to it, just moved on. Because this wasn't the climax. This was just the middle. And something better was waiting around the corner. Something that had nothing to do with Brandon. And everything to do with the man who had handed me coffee and confidence when I had nothing else. It would have been so easy to destroy him. A single email, a quiet word to other firms in the network. One phone call, and I could have burned what was left of his credibility to ash. But I didn't. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't need to win by making someone else lose. Brandon didn't deserve my mercy, but he also didn't deserve my energy. I had better things to build, more meaningful fires to tend to, and someone waiting beside me who actually saw me as a partner, not a placeholder for ambition or ego. Daniel never pushed. He never gloated about the way things played out. He simply said, "You handled that with more grace than most people would." And I answered honestly, I didn't do it for grace. I did it because he's not my story anymore. We were sitting in his apartment that night, sharing takeout on the floor like we used to in the early days. No fancy table, no labels, just comfort. He asked me between bites of pad thai, "Do you ever miss the version of life you thought you'd have?" I paused. The wedding, the house, the smiling holiday cards, the false sense of security that came from thinking love was a finish line you just had to cross once. And I said no. I miss being naive sometimes, but not the life. That life would have caged me. He nodded like he already knew. A few weeks later, he handed me a small black box. Not in public, not at dinner, not on a beach or under twinkling lights. Just us in my office, late after a meeting when I was knee-deep in a budget report. "Open it," he said. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, no spectacle, just one promise. Not to rescue me, not to rewrite the past, but to walk beside me through whatever came next. "I don't need a yes right now," he said. "I just need you to know it's not about fixing you. You're not broken. I just want to build with you." I didn't cry. I didn't fall apart. I stood up, walked over, and kissed him like I already knew the answer. Because this time I wasn't being chosen. I was choosing a man who never needed me to be anyone but exactly who I became. Choosing a life that wasn't about redemption, but evolution. Choosing to write the next chapter not as a comeback, but as a woman who never really left. The wedding we planned was small, private, beautiful in its own quiet way. No string quartet, no 5-tier cake, no grand spectacle. Just vows that were honest, a dress I chose for me, and a man who showed up not for the audience, but for me. And this time, I walked down the aisle with no fear, no doubts, no ghosts in my chest, because I had already buried them with a pen a choice, and the kind of silence that thundered louder than any I do. The night before the wedding, I stood in front of the mirror, not to practice vows, not to admire the dress, but to look myself in the eyes, really look. No makeup, no jewelry, no armor, just the woman who had once been left behind, and chose to come back anyway. I didn't write a new set of promises for Daniel. I wrote one for myself. I vow to never again shrink to fit into someone else's story. I whispered it aloud, over and over, until it stopped feeling like a performance and started feeling like truth. Because no matter how much I loved Daniel, no matter how kind and patient and present he'd been, I knew this version of me was born in fire. And I never wanted to forget what it cost to get here. The ceremony was quiet. No more than 30 guests, some friends from the new city, a few clients turned companions, my therapist, Daniel's aunt who made the best lemon cake on earth. I didn't invite anyone from my past life, no one from the town where I'd grown up, no one who had once clutched pearls when Brandon disappeared and then disappeared themselves when the spotlight faded. This time I wasn't trying to impress anyone. There were no photographers, no hashtags, just a soft violin in the background. And the man I was marrying waiting calm steady, not because he had something to prove, but because he had already proven it with every quiet, consistent choice. When the officiant asked for vows, I didn't recite anything scripted. I said I built a life, thinking I had to be perfect to be loved. You showed me I only needed to be real. And that was enough. After the ceremony, as people laughed and drank and swayed to music under string lights, I stepped away for a moment just to breathe, to remember. I thought about the first wedding, the flower arch, the silence, the sound of my own heartbeat thudding inside my ears like a countdown to collapse. I didn't feel pain anymore when I remembered it. I felt distance, perspective, power. It was the moment everything went wrong, and the moment everything finally had a chance to become right. Later that week, I got a notification, a request, from an unknown email, but I knew who it was the second I saw. The subject line, buyback proposal, Verdant AI Holdings, Brandon again. Apparently, after our rejection, his funding collapsed, his co-founder bailed, and the startup he had once bragged about now sat half-dead, held together by scraps, and still partially owned by the firm I managed under Daniel. He wanted to buy back control. He wanted me to sign the release. For a moment, I stared at the document, just like I had stared at my reflection in that cracked studio apartment mirror years ago. There was no rage this time, no hunger for revenge, just clarity. Brandon was asking me for freedom, the same freedom he once stole from me, and I was the only one who could grant it. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and smiled, because I already knew exactly how this would end. I didn't respond right away. I let the email sit, 3 days, then 5, then a week, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted him to feel it, the weight of waiting, of not knowing. Exactly the way I once sat in a bridal suite, staring at the door, praying it would open. When I finally replied, it was one sentence. Please forward the formal paperwork for review. He sent it within the hour. Attached was a desperate buyback proposal riddled with urgency and thin promises. He didn't have the cash, he wanted favorable terms. He was hoping somewhere in the back of his entitled mind that the girl he left would still want to please him. I read every line, then printed it. Sat at my desk with a red pen and underlined one paragraph. Signatory approval required to relinquish holding rights. That was me, my name, my power, my decision. Daniel came by as I stared at it, coffee in hand. "You sure you don't want me to deal with it?" he asked. His voice was gentle, protective, steady. But I shook my head. "No, I want to be the one who ends this." He nodded and left the room. He knew this wasn't business. It was closure, and only I could give it. I took the pen from my drawer, the same one I'd used to sign my first contract, when Backline Ops was still just a name on a notebook. No rage, no dramatic flourish, just one slow, deliberate signature across the bottom. And then I fed the copy into the shredder, watched it disappear in long curling strips. The deal, the plea, the past, gone. I didn't keep a copy, didn't frame it, didn't even reply to the email that followed. "Thank you, I appreciate the grace." He still didn't get it. This wasn't grace, this was me choosing silence over spectacle, dignity over destruction, power over petty. Because the most satisfying revenge isn't public. It's private, it's calm, it's never having to explain how far you've come to someone who stopped walking with you long ago. Sometimes justice is loud, but sometimes it's just a signature. One he'll think about every time he looks at the company he almost lost. Every time he signs a deal knowing he's only still standing because the woman he abandoned chose not to bury him. Not because he deserved mercy, but because she didn't need revenge to win. She already had everything.